Well, howdy everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of the International DT466E with the cracked inner timing cover. I've made some progress since the last video. I've got some parts and I've cleaned up some old parts, and we need to make a decision before we can move forward. We still have the same 3 options we had in the last video. Number 1, we can insist the customer buys a new inner timing cover. Number 2, we can use this used inner timing cover. Number 3, we can fix that original inner timing cover, which, as you will remember, was cracked by the coolant elbow. Well, we'll start with this part. This is the used timing cover I got from the salvage yard. This part has the same date code. It has the same part number. It's 100% compatible with the timing cover that we took off of the engine. But there's some problems with it. So I'm not sure what happened to this part. For certain, it's been off before and it's been resealed. At least once, possibly several times, and I don't know if it was the guy's first time ever working on anything ever, or if he was just having a real bad day, or what happened. But let me give you a little bit of a tour of some of the damage that he caused. So down here at the bottom, there's 4 tapped holes. That's where the oil pan bolts up to the timing cover. And if you look inside here, there's a little bit of chips there. I actually ran a tap through it just to see what it was like. But they actually broke the casting on both sides. Those are supposed to be closed holes. There's supposed to be a little boss in there. So I don't know if they put a bolt in there that was too long, or they packed a bunch of silicone in there and tried to tighten the bolt up or something, but the holes look like they are probably stripped as well. So I don't have an explanation for that. And then pretty much every other tapped hole on this cover is either stripped or has already been helicoiled. So there's a helicoil here, 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 and here. So pretty much the same story on the other side. So up here where the high pressure oil pump bolts up, the top tapped hole is stripped. You can see maybe a little bit of a thread at the bottom, but the top part of the hole is completely stripped out. The bottom hole has been helicoiled, but the helicoil has either come out or it wasn't installed properly. It's actually sitting higher than the top surface of the casting. Now there's one other spot that I noticed. This is where the air compressor bolts up, and it's got this kind of square O-ring that goes around the outside as your seal. Well, on the inside lip of this casting, it's actually damaged. This piece of the casting is actually missing. Now this is the original timing cover that I removed from the engine in the first video. And we've had a kind of a go at welding this cracked flange here for the coolant elbow, and it looks pretty good. I think it's going to be fine. So you can see right here I welded it through the face. We cleaned up that face, and then plenty of weld back here where it was cracked. It was actually cracked. This whole piece was cracked completely away. The problem with this cover, for the most part, is just corrosion. You can actually see right here there's a boss that has a pipe thread in it. It's supposed to be flat here on the top. It's actually eaten it completely away, and I've actually had to go in here with a pipe tap and tap this a little bit deeper because the elbow that was there was only, or the fitting that was there was only about 1 turn of threads holding it. I got the steel sleeve out that goes back to the oil cooler pedestal, so no problems there. The other big problem is up here at the top. This is where one of the gaskets rides for the coolant passage, where it comes out of the top of the block. And you see we're missing a little bit of that lip there. It's just corroded from stuff sitting on the top of here. This is the top of the cover. And I don't know if you can see the bottom surface of that groove, but it's not very good. Oh, but the threads in this part are actually in good shape. I did have to helicoil one of them. This one right here, there was a bolt broken off in that elbow when I took it apart. So I fixed that. The other threads are all fine. So this is what those 4 tapped holes for the oil pan are supposed to look like. This is the part of the casting that was actually missing on that other piece. So I don't have an explanation for that. Anyway, the back side of the casting is okay, except that we still have this damaged place here from where the water pump must have gone bad at one time. I don't think that's going to hurt too much. I don't want to try to weld that because there's a good chance we'll warp this area and then we'll never get it to seal up. So if we're going to use this cover, we're going to have to just let that ride. So I don't think we'll have much of a pressure loss from the water pump, and we know it's been working fine that way for, you know, years and years. So that seems like a low risk. Anyway, overall, I think this cover is actually cleaner, and it has problems, but it sort of seems like it might be better. Now, the other part I had to get from the salvage yard was this coolant elbow. This is the original one, and I don't know how well you'll be able to see it on the camera, but this is where the hose, the lower radiator hose, basically fits over top of this and clamps on. It's actually corroded so badly right here that you can see where the salt's been coming through on the inside. So that's actually got to be leaking. Probably the only reason that it wasn't leaking externally is that there was so much corrosion right here that it was blocking the path of the coolant to get out from the end of that hose. So I got a used one from the salvage yard. This one's in pretty good condition. We'll just go ahead and toss this one. Anyway, I guess that's where we're at. And by the time you guys see this video, it'll be too late to matter. But I'm really curious if you can put down in the comment box what you guys would do. I mean, would you insist that the customer buys a new part, regardless of what it costs? Would you patch up that junkyard part and put it on, hoping that it was better? Or would you fix up the old timing cover and let it ride? Personally, I'm kind of in the devil you know camp. That's sort of the direction that I'm leaning right now. I think I'm going to go eat some lunch and think it over, and we'll come back and start putting this thing together. Well, I think when I left off, I was going to go eat lunch and then come back out here and make a decision about this timing cover. That was 4 days ago. And I actually had to wait 4 days to get the gaskets for this coolant filter base and the 2 O-rings for this little sleeve that goes back to the oil cooler pedestal. This is like literally the first part that gets installed when you go to install this inner timing cover. So I haven't been able to put anything back together yet. Anyway, I decided to go with the old cover that's been welded, and we're gonna just do one of these and hope for the best. I don't trust that thing. Too much damage. So I've done pretty much everything that you're not supposed to do, which is put a little bit of silicone on those gaskets, and there was some corrosion on the cover here where the O-ring goes around the bottom of the oil cooler or the oil filter base. I put a little bit of RTV on that too. You're not supposed to do that, but I don't know what else to do. There was some pretty severe pitting in there. And then we've got to make a decision about what to do up here. So obviously the casting is bad up here, but if you look, if we can get the camera to go into macro mode, the surface there is just not very good. Basically anywhere that there was coolant, the aluminum has corroded pretty badly. Now the engine block is fine. The corrosion's all isolated to this aluminum timing cover. So I guess I'm thinking my best option is just to smear a little bit of a thin layer of RTV silicone down in the bottom of this groove and then put the gasket back on. And we'll leave the side that faces the engine untreated. And the oil part of it's fine. It's just up here where this coolant passage is that we have a problem. The air compressor flange is fine. The flange for the high pressure oil pump is fine. It's just up here in this corner. So I don't know. I think that's going to be okay. The service manual tells you to use silicone, RTV silicone on these gaskets, like on the outer cover where there's multiple pieces that join together. So seems like low risk, but still feel kind of dirty doing it. And then they leave you a little bit extra here. I guess you had to trim that off before you put it on. And then we'll put some RTV right here at this corner and maybe smear a little bit on the oil pan gasket because good chance that'll leak. Okay, here goes. I got a little bit of RTV in the grooves up there where the coolant passages are, and then I jammed the rest of it full of Sil-Glide silicone grease to try to hold that seal in there while we're monkeying around with it. This one's not going anywhere, but the rest of them could easily fall out, so I'm going to go shove that thing on. Okay, the timing cover is on, and I've got all the bolts tight to 25 Newton meters. Put a little paint on them just to be sure, and then I put a little bit of Loctite on them because we do not want those coming out. I'm getting ready to put the cam gear on, but I found a problem. See those scars on the bottom side of the camshaft there? That's got to be from where the cam gear was originally pressed on. So I hope that doesn't hurt anything. I stoned them down as best I could, but yeah, I don't like that at all. Good old international quality control. Okay, I checked my camshaft end play with the dial indicator. I got about 6 thousandths. The book says anywhere between 5 and 13 is acceptable. So you can see it right there. Just right at 6 thousandths, so I think that'll be just fine. Okay, now we got to set the timing. So there's a single punch mark on this idler gear and the camshaft. Those have to line up. There's a single mark on the crank and the second idler gear. Those have to line up. And then there's a double mark on both idler gears that have to line up with each other. The book also says to replace this top idler gear bolt, I guess because of this sealant. I don't know why you had to replace it, why you couldn't just use some high temperature thread sealant, but I don't want to do this again, so I guess we'll do what the man says. The bolts aren't expensive. I actually bought both of them for the top and bottom idler gears. They're about $32 for the pair. Well, you gotta love International. The bolt on the lower timing gear gets torqued to 470 foot-pounds. So I had to get the Big Daddy 3/4 drive torque wrench out to do that. Also, it takes a 20 millimeter 12-point socket, which I did not have. Actually, the way I got it loose was using a 13/16 12-point socket and a great big long 1/2-inch drive breaker bar. That was kind of sketchy. Anyway, International sells a special service tool just for that one bolt right there. The dealership wants $85 for it. So I bought this Armstrong 12-point 3/4 drive socket, 20 millimeter from McMaster Carr for $15, which is a little bit better because I'm sure it's gonna collect a lot of dust. I don't think I've ever used a 20 millimeter hex for anything ever before this. Come on. I'm telling you, that is tight. Okay, that's it. Now I'm going to go through and check the backlash on the gears. There's some specs in the book, but we can't really do a whole lot about it. I checked them before I took it apart too. Everything seemed okay, so we haven't really changed anything. We should be fine. One thing I like to do though before I put anything else together is just take a picture of all these timing marks lining up. That way, you don't wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, convinced that you got to tear the timing cover back apart to verify that the timing marks are actually lined up. That has happened to me before. Anyway, it's just a good idea. Okay, pretty much the same idea on the outer timing cover, except that there are 1, 2, 3 joints that you have to seal up with some RTV silicone, and then I packed everything again with that silicone grease. There's also 3 O-rings here. Well, the grooves on this one were in better shape, so we're going to try this one au naturel. See how it goes. Alright, I'm going to install the new front main seal into this oil pump housing. The manual specifically says to use this Loctite 515 gasket eliminator on the outside diameter of the seal. So that's what I'm going to do. There we go. I'm sure you could use like Permatex number 2 or something like that too. And I've got this inch drive socket that's exactly the right size to fit this seal. So the front main seal comes with a wear sleeve. on the inside of the damper that needs to be replaced. Technically they don't have to be replaced unless they have a groove in them, but like I said, this one was leaking, so I think it's better to go ahead and just replace it. So here's how I do it. There's probably some special tool, I don't know what it is, but I use my air hammer with this extra long straight punch, and then just come in on the inside here and you just want to peen that sleeve. You know, you just work your way around, rattling the thing, peening it, and in the process of peening it will actually make it expand. Then you can sneak in here from the back side, like so, and now just be careful because sometimes they don't have a sleeve, a wear sleeve. The sleeve only gets installed when you install a new seal. I think the 6-liter Power Strokes are that way. Yeah, funny story. A long time ago I used to work in a big factory. They had a huge drying machine, had a spherical roller bearing in it, probably, I don't know, 400 millimeters in diameter, so 15 inches diameter, outside diameter. Anyway, the guys took it out to replace it, and they were looking inside and they saw kind of a lip, and they figured it must have a replaceable sleeve that the bearing sits in. So they got in there with a torch and tried to cut that sleeve out to replace it. Well, they found out that it wasn't a sleeve. It was actually a detail that was machined into that bearing carrier from the factory. So they had to get a company to come in and line bore it and re-weld it and bore that bearing journal back to size. So just use your head. So I use a little bit more of this 515 sealant on the sleeve here, and then I just use the old sleeve as a press tool on my arbor press to just push that thing right on there. So just a heads up if anybody's doing this job, the oil pan bolts are not all the same. The ones that go into the actual block, which are the ones that go along the sides of the oil pan, are longer. The shorter ones go into the front and rear covers. And that may be how they blew the casting apart on that other inner timing cover that we got, was putting the long bolts where the short bolts should go. Don't ask me why International couldn't make them all the same. That seems pretty stupid, but they didn't. I'm just using the hot plate to heat up this damper, and then I like to use these temperature crayons. So they basically melt at a prescribed temperature. And they're very accurate. They're a lot more accurate than these cheesy infrared thermometers. But these do work, so we're almost there. That's it. Cool. I'll say this about heat shrink fits. They're pretty cool, I think. It's a neat way to do things, but you better be sure you get it right on the first try, because you've got, maybe a second or so to get the thing back off there before it's too cool. You're going to be pulling it again with the puller. So last time I pretty much destroyed this retaining plate trying to get it out, and I didn't get a new one. I actually got a used one off of that same truck that the other timing cover came off of. So I'm going to return the timing cover, but I'm going to keep this plate, so we'll work out a deal on that. So I put some silicone on the crankshaft and then a little bit on the plate just to keep the oil from seeping out around the key. Well, I wish I could tell you guys, here's the silver bullet answer as far as coolant goes for these diesel engines. It's pretty much a minefield. Every manufacturer says you can only run their recommended coolant, All the aftermarket companies say that their aftermarket stuff is just fine. I don't know what the truth is. They've been running the old green stuff. That's pretty common in my experience. I tested it with these test strips. It basically has 0% of the nitrite additive. So we're going to replace the coolant filter. The new coolant filter will have a charge, basically a nitrite charge that will dissolve in the coolant and should bring that back up. So the nitrite's important for any engine that has wet sleeves. Typically speaking, engines that have wet sleeves will also have a coolant filter that can be changed. So normally if I'm changing out coolant, I use Peak. And if it's a dry sleeve engine with no coolant, I'll use the Peak Final Charge. And if it's a wet sleeve engine that has a coolant filter, I'll use Fleet Charge. So it's kind of two different schools of thought on the same issue. Maybe I'm transposing those two, but one of them has the nitrite charge and the other one has some kind of magical stuff that doesn't have to be replenished. And I don't know how long either one of them is supposed to last, but like I said, it's a minefield. That's what I do. Probably just stick with the manufacturer's recommended coolant if you're nervous about it. But most of these old trucks in this area are just running whatever generic Walmart coolant they can find. Well, I think that's pretty much it. Everything's back together. Got the coolant filled up, got the oil filled up, changed both filters. Belts are on, hoses are on. There's a few little things to finish up, the cross braces for the radiator and stuff like that, but I think we're ready for the scary part, which is starting it. Yeah, I barred the engine over a couple times, made a few turns with it. Didn't feel anything that was out of the ordinary. You know, nothing tight, didn't hear anything hitting. I think we're okay. Well, something's wrong. I'm not getting any oil pressure, and I don't know why. I don't know if I put together that relief valve wrong, or the oil pump itself wrong, or maybe the gasket fell off of the pickup tube. I don't know. But yeah, I've cranked it quite a bit and I can't get any oil pressure. So, I don't know. Yeah, think about it. That sucks. Well, I've been looking around the shop for a suitable fan belt to hang myself with, and I kind of stepped away for a minute and had to think about it. I'm kind of wondering if maybe the oil pump is not self-priming. The book says nothing about priming the oil pump itself. Doesn't say anything about packing it with grease. It just says assemble, whatever. So let me show you how helpful the service manual is. It basically just says when the engine's assembled, it's recommended to lubricate with oil before starting. And then it says, literally says right here, pressure prime the lubrication system with oil prior to starting as follows. Inject oil into the engine to fill the oil filters and charge the entire system. After priming, check the oil level before the engine is put back into service. Refer to chart for proper oil capacity. It says nothing about how to do that. It says nothing about where to inject the oil. It gives me absolutely nothing to go on. So I don't know, I guess we're going to have to roll our own kind of pressure priming system here. I don't even know where to start. Maybe one of you guys who's been working on these engines for a long time can chime in about how to do this properly. So this is kind of a diagram view of how the oil system is supposed to work. So the pickup tube's here, it sucks the oil up into this gear pump, then it comes out into this lower galley to the oil cooler, there's a thermostat that controls whether it goes past the oil cooler or through the oil cooler, into the filter base, and then up into this upper galley where it does everything, the cam, the crank, etc. And then there's also this is our reservoir right here for our high pressure oil pump, so it's going to fill this cavity right here in the front cover. That's going to provide oil for the HEUI injection system. Alright, here's the plan. I'm going to use this kind of syringe style oil extractor to shove some oil into the oil galleys. I just pulled the oil line off the air compressor. That runs to a T-fitting behind the compressor. That's where the oil pressure sensor is. So I'm hoping that's a good place to kind of inject some oil. So I've done 2 of these already. I'm going to do 2 more, I think. That'll be, I don't know, 800 milliliters, so right around a quart. Well, I've still got no oil pressure whatsoever. So I guess it's coming back apart. Awesome. Okay guys, it's the next morning, and I'm not feeling too good about this truck. I knew something was going to go wrong, but this is not what I expected. I thought it was going to leak coolant somewhere, but I did not anticipate no oil pressure. So something's wrong. It's going to have to come back apart. I'll give you guys a little bit of a life hack here. If you're feeling bad or down or whatever, cleaning helps a lot. So I came in this morning, just cleaned off my cart, cleaned up the floor around the truck a little bit, cleaned off my toolbox, put the tools away. So I don't know why, but cleaning and organizing and putting things away is one of those little things that just naturally makes people feel better. It's like sitting in front of a campfire. Something way down in the reptilian part of our brain. So we got to figure out what the problem is. I know the truck had good oil pressure when it came in, so it's definitely something that I did. I guess the first option is this gasket here, which is right here. Goes between the pickup tube, and it actually goes up to the rear timing cover. And then the oil comes through the rear timing cover, kind of into the front timing cover, and into the actual oil pump here. So we could have a problem with that gasket. I did not replace it. This is the new one. I left the old one in place, and I guess there's a chance we knocked it off. And if we knocked that off, then it's kind of a 50-50. Do we drop the pan and try to fix that, or do we take off the front timing cover again? Probably drop the pan, even though those bolts are super crusty. That'd probably still be easier than dealing with all the timing gears and all that crap. So the other option is maybe I put something together wrong in the pump. And then I guess the third option is this pressure relief valve. Maybe it came unseated, or I got the wrong O-ring for it. I don't know. This is the old O-ring right here. So I guess beyond that, I guess there could just be an issue with the seal in the front cover. I just don't know. So I think what I'm going to do is pull the damper back off and pull the oil pump back off, and we'll just have a look-see. Okay, the oil pump's apart. I don't really see any problems. I measured all this stuff before. I know it's within spec. I mean, I know there's some little scuff marks here, but that's really not that bad. The only thing I've noticed so far is that based on the witness marks that are kind of like how you see the wear pattern here, see there's a little bit of a ring right here. I think that would have been caused by this corner relief here. So that means that I had these rotors installed backwards of how they were when I originally took the engine apart. So I don't know if that's enough to cause a problem, but that's the only thing I've seen so far. So I got the borescope camera out and checked the pickup tube. The gasket is definitely there. I can't get to the pressure relief valve without taking everything back apart, so we can't really check that, but I don't see why that would be a problem. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put the pump back together, but I'm going to use some of this really thick assembly lube, or I might even use some of this white lithium grease. That's what we used to use before they started selling this actual assembly lube. And you know, hopefully that extra film of thick oil will be enough for the pump to kind of prime up. So I think we can put the pump back together without putting the harmonic balancer back on, and crank the engine over and see if we get anywhere. Okay, she's all snotted up. Let's put it back together. Okay, I got the oil pump slammed back on. I haven't torqued the bolts or anything, but it's close enough for right now. And I'm going to crank it over and see what happens. some amount of oil should probably leak out of the front main seal there, since we don't have the damper in place. I don't know how much. Like I said, I'm just going to crank it enough to see if it builds oil pressure. The engine's not going to start because this is a HUE system, so that's what, high pressure electronic unit injectors. Anyway, this section of the front cover right here is actually the reservoir for the high pressure oil pump right there. So until you build base oil pressure in the engine, this reservoir is empty. So there's no high pressure oil to feed this pump, which means that it can't pressurize the injectors. So we may have to actually prime this cavity in the pump. So we can take the engine oil temperature sensor out right there and squirt a little bit of oil in there and get this sort of primed up so that the injectors will fire. But if the base oil pump is working, it should fill that cavity right away. Alright guys, I think that was it. I cranked and cranked and cranked, and we finally built oil pressure. I think that was the problem. I just didn't have the pump primed up. So it actually tried to start. So I think that's a good sign. We're going to put the damper back on. So probably the oil pump's a little bit worn and it needs to be replaced, but I'm going to put it back together for now and we'll let them make that call. Alright guys, I think we're going to put a fork in this one and we'll call it done. Not sure what to make of that oil pump issue. I think the problem is I'm just a chicken and I didn't crank it long enough. If I would have cranked it long enough, I think it would have eventually sucked some oil up through the pickup tube and created oil pressure. I was chickening out too soon. It took, I don't know, even with the assembly lube, it took a good 30 seconds to get oil pressure up there. So probably the oil pump's on the, it's on the way out. I know it's kind of at the wear limits right now, so I'll talk it over with them. So I think we accomplished what we set out to do. It took me a lot longer than what I expected it to, but that's how she goes. So maybe we learned something along the way. Really isn't that bad of a job. If the thing hadn't been so rusty, it wouldn't have taken that long at all. It's just fighting with those rusted bolts. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but I did end up replacing every bolt that was in that front cover. So most of them I bought from the dealership, some of them I got from a used engine, but yeah, we basically replaced every single fastener that was involved in this repair. Anyway guys, thanks for watching, and I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving, and I'll have something else for you pretty soon.